the video that no one asked for, but everyone wants to know. So I think that I didn't make this video because I thought it was kind of pointless. If you learned slash watched the video that Aussieman made about all his experiences and you watched the masterclass series, I thought this video would be unnecessary. But I'm making this now because I feel like I'm kind of forgetting things. So it's more of my own for my own documentation rather than for anyone else. So it is a bit of rambly. It is going to be rambly because I'm going to be trying to recall things and to string together a cohesive argument, which is probably not going to make any sense. So let's just get into it. Why is Aussieman at a near native level? And this is going to be a theoretical analysis, right? These are all things I've observed. I've talked to Aussieman personally. I know, shocking. I paid him $1 million. Anyway, it's really expensive talking to him. But no, just kidding, guys. But go subscribe to him on Patreon. But so yeah, let's just get into it. So the factors. So I'm just gonna. I have some key points I wrote, but I did like make any detailed explanations because I thought it would be pointless. So high motivation. So Aussieman was extremely motivated to learn Japanese. Like, if you've read any Discords or watched any videos, you know that he was learning 60 words a day. He was foregoing sleep. He quit judo. He quit, BJ, exercising, etc. He was losing weight because he was so sick from working so hard at learning Japanese, etc. So we know he had huge motivation, and motivation is a massive factor. Because when you have motivation, you're gonna be disciplined because you want to do something, right? And right, someone who's unmotivated is not gonna be able to learn that many words, right? If you hate studying Japanese, probably learning 5 words is gonna be too much. If you love Japanese, like you literally wake up and the first thing you think about is Japanese, you're probably gonna be learning 50, 60 words a day, right? Right? That's just gonna be kind of obvious, right? And that's because your brain, everything, your brain chemistry, everything's telling you this is essential for my survival, right? An example I will give, right, is like food or something like that, right? So when we eat food, like let's say you've had sushi for the first time, ramen for this time, you don't forget the taste of that food, right? Right? I didn't eat let me see. I haven't eaten pudding in like 10 years or something, right? And I had pudding recently, maybe a couple weeks ago, and it tastes exactly as I thought it would, right? And that's because it's so essential to my survival to know what food tastes like that my brain just remembers it, right? It almost stores it into long term memory instantly, right? And so I give that example to show that if you're highly motivated, Japanese word sentences, structures, grammar structures will enter your memory far easier and much better, right? Like if you're highly motivated and you learn a new word, you might remember that word for like 2 3 weeks. But someone who's unmotivated is not going to remember that word 2 seconds later. And yeah, that was kind of like an anecdotal because I don't know the exact science as to why being motivated and focused um, causes better memory retention. I do have resources linked to the science. So if you go to conspiracy theories in my resource doc, then you can go to cognitive performance and then go to not this, not this either. Man, I'm forgetting what is this? Okay, well, of course I can't find it. Anyway, it's in here somewhere, I swear. Oh my goodness. Of course it's not here. Or I can't find it. Okay. Stuff like this. Andrew Huberman, he's a neuroscientist, very well. He has multiple papers published. He's a professor at Harvard, I believe. Huberman. Let me see. Oh my goodness. Stanford, excuse me. So the guy's legit, you know. You can read his papers, but I think the podcast is obviously way more accessible, so I would highly recommend watching his podcast. He does explain all the nitty gritty scientific stuff, like, you know, synapses, different hormones, etc., etc. So, okay, back to this. So he kind of goes into explanation as to why, like, being motivated, being focused, um, causes someone to remember things better or to increase cognitive performance, right? Being motivated. Goal setting, right? That's another huge one. Having goals makes things easier. It makes learning easier because you have a set date, a set time, or a set amount you want to do, and you're going to do that, right? Rather than kind of aimlessly wandering, you're kind of shooting for the stars, but you don't know where you're landing, right? Rather than if you're like, let me get to, I don't know, let me get to the mountain first before I get to the stars, right? And so you have those steps. And Aussieman had a lot of goals, right? JLBTN1. I want to learn this amount of words. I want to learn have Japanese friends, etc., etc., etc. I want to be really good at Japanese. Like I want to be cooler than everyone, right? So that's a huge one. Is goal setting, and that plays a big role because we know people who set goals tend to perform better. Athletes, politicians, etc., successful people, scientists, school, etc. It doesn't really matter, right? People who set goals, they perform better in life, right? And that's kind of gets kind of right. Japanese is no exception, right? If I just do nothing and I have no goals, I'm gonna be aimless, right? And you're gonna be aimless in life, right? That's why you have goals. Like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. And that allows you to be focused and to hone in on specific things you need to do in order to get to those goals, right? So a big one is JLPT and one for Aussieman, right? He had a set date when he was going to take the JLPT and one, and so because of that, he was highly motivated and had a clear goal in mind to get to. And so that's how he was able to learn those 60 words a day because he was like, okay, that's my goal. I need to do this, this, and this to get there. Right? Rather than you learning 60 words a day and going, I don't know, I'm just learning 60 words a day. I don't really know where this is going, right? You're kind of aimless. Like, oh, why am I doing this, et cetera, right? As adults, if you're an adult, it's going to be way harder to do things without knowing the why. I don't know exact science behind that, but that's just how adults are, right? We can't really do things and not know the reason for it, right? It's kind of like learning algebra in school or trigonometry. You're like, what the fuck is this point? Like, I'm never gonna I don't need to know how many fucking watermelons James needs, right? Or has. Like, what the fuck is this, right? And it's very hard for people to focus in on those things because they're very abstract, right? And so, if your goals for Japanese are abstract, then it's going to be hard to get to those goals because you're not really sure what you need to do. Rather than if you have those concrete goals and you have concrete steps to get there, it's going to be way easier because you're like, you know the why and you know the when. So next thing I want to talk about is musical background. Aussieman did play music, or not play music. He played the guitar, and we know that people who play instruments, who really focus in on sounds, right? They have a better time when it comes to language learning for the most part and acquiring better accents because their brain is more in tune with focusing on sounds, right? Like as a kid, you don't focus on meaning first. When you're learning a language as a baby, you focus on the sound first, right? As adults, when you're past, the critical period, you focus on meaning first, then sound. But it's actually the other way around if you want a good accent. It's sound first, then meaning. Now, this is kind of like a very arbitrary binary. It's like more like a mix of both. But I'm just making that argument for simplicity's sake. And so I talk about this, or not talk about this. I have a bunch of things you can look at um, to kind of see why this is the case scientifically. But I'm just giving anecdotal evidence because I don't think anyone wants to sit here and fucking listen to all this or read all that read off all these studies. That doesn't really matter, you know. But point is, the science supports that musicians, singers, they have an easier time acquiring a better accent. So, next factor is exercise. Martial arts, running, etc. Whatever Aussieman did. So, the reason I've been thinking about this, and the reason I put it as a factor, is because Aussieman did martial arts, and also Jazzy did martial arts as well, right? They're both, quote unquote disciplined. I have very different view on discipline, but we'll go by Aussieman's view on it. And so, martial arts teaches discipline. And what do I mean by this? And what does Aussieman mean by this, right? Well, let me just go over my little thing I wrote. So some people in the language community that have been extremely successful, Aussieman and Jazzy, have done some sort of sport or martial art, have talked about the benefits it gives you. That being discipline. What do they mean by that exactly? On face value, it seems simple. Discipline is about being able to do things consistently that bring you closer to your goals. What they really are getting at is that sports gives you the ability to recognize that progress is not always linear, that every day is not going to be your best day. In fact, some days no perceivable progress is seen. Doing the same thing every day without seeing progress does in fact yield results. Effort yields results, mental toughness, etc. Oh my goodness, I did not. I did not check over the grant. I did not check if this was made any comprehensible sense. So, what I'm trying to say on this part, I think this is important. When you learn, when you're language learning, when you're learning Japanese, there will be days where there's no perceivable progress, and that's very difficult for people because this might be the first time in your life that you have done something and you're not seeing progress for days, months, years. And what martial arts teaches you, what sports teaches you, is that there you will have long periods where you're not seeing any progress. Let's say wrestling, judo, running. You're not going to see progress for a long time, maybe 6 months to a year of any progress, right? But you are progressing, you are getting better. And when you have that experience beforehand, it gives you the confidence to know that even though I'm learning 50 words a day and I'm not seeing any progress, it's actually doing something, right? And it teaches you that mental toughness. It's like you just have to keep going. I think that's an important part as to why Aussieman was so successful is because of doing judo growing up. Like, right, there are times, right, when you're learning judo, when you're learning any sport, there's gonna be times for long periods of time where you just suck. Right, running. You don't run a 5-minute mile in like 2 weeks of training. Okay, it could be a whole year before your time goes down. Right. Let's say you run a 7-minute mile. It could take a whole year for you to get down to 6 minutes and 30 seconds. Right. Right. And that whole time you're just like, is this actually doing anything? I'm coming to practice every day and I feel like I'm getting faster. You are getting faster. You're just not seeing the progress, right? It's like you're watering a plant and you're just like, man, it doesn't look like it's growing. But then it is actually growing the whole time. And so martial art teaches that in sports that you're progressing even though you don't see it. And that's kind of the main point I was wanted to get to was that progress is not linear. That's what martial arts teaches you. And in Aussieman's case, judo, right? Progress is not linear, right? You don't become state champ in one day, right? So age is another factor. So Aussieman started with 16. Excuse me. Age is a huge factor. We know this, right? Your neuroplasticity gets worse as you get older, right? and it's easier to learn languages before the critical period. And for some reason, I did not link the science on the critical period. That's weird. Whatever. Okay, we know that the younger you are, the easier it is to learn languages. Okay, your hearing's better, your neuroplasticity is higher, etc. Right? Right. Those are the main two factors: neuroplasticity and your hearing. And of course, as a kid, you're not as embarrassed at failing. That's another key point, right? Is when you're younger, you're not scared of failing, and you're not as embarrassed about being incompetent at things. And so it's just a huge difference when you start at 16 because of the neuroplasticity and because of the hearing. And in fact, let me write that down. Okay, another huge oh my goodness. Hearing. Okay, I can't spell either. This is I'm part of the language games community. Of course I can't read or write, but doesn't matter. So extrovert. So being an extrovert is a huge advantage because you're not afraid of speaking. And speaking is obviously one of the biggest factors when it comes to how good your accent is. Right? If you don't speak, you're not going to be able to speak well. I know it sounds fucking crazy, but it's true. So next point. Yeah, I don't really need to explain that point because if you're extroverted, you're going to want to talk more. If you talk more, you get better. So outputting from the beginning. When you output from the beginning, your competence in the language and your ability to understand it are going to be at the same level. And I think that's a huge factor if your competence and your ability to understand are at the same level, because that's what Aussieman did. And I think when they're at the same level, it's like a synergetic effect, right? You're not playing catch up. They're always at the same level. I can't really give a good explanation as to why this works. I can't. Yeah, I think it just works. Aussieman is just a case study, so that's that point's a little iffy, but I think it's true. Because actually, now that I think about it, it's because you're constantly reviewing the words as well that you learned by outputting. You're getting extra practice in with those words anyway, right? So I think it helps improve your understanding as well. Speaking improves your understanding as well. Wow. And so I think that's a huge factor, right? That people always talk about, right? When speaking, you get more input in. It also, the input is more comprehensible, right? Because people are dumbing down their language so you can understand them. It's more and more comprehensible. That's actually, that makes sense, guys. So another factor I want to talk about is Western Japanese dialect theory. And this is a theory that I came across because I was wondering about this. And also, I just came about this on accident, actually. But, so Kaz is a native Japanese speaker. He's really good at English. Basically, almost native level. Pretty much native level, actually. And his theory was that people who speak Western Japanese dialects have an easier time learning English. And there's a video he shows of his friend. He doesn't know any English, but he can replicate English very well. And there's multiple theories behind this. And I think the biggest theory is that people from Western Japan are not as shy as those from Kanto region, etc. And they're not afraid to speak. And also, it could be sound systems more similar to English as well. I think that's his explanation. So I want to throw that out there as well, since Aussieman learned cross-Cybermen. And I think this might have some validity to it, but obviously we're going to have to... oh my goodness. Obviously, we're going to have to see more people learn cross-Cybermen, right, in order to see if this is actually true. But I thought it was an interesting little theory I it was an interesting little theory I had regarding this, and I don't know. It could be possible that learning Consonant actually is the way to go. Since also Aussieman has his own theory about this as well, right? Which is that since people don't understand dialects as well in Japan, right? Like if you speak Kansai, someone from let's say Fukuoka or like Kyushu or like Tokyo, they might not know that you're speaking the dialect incorrectly because they don't have an in-depth understanding of that dialect. So it makes you appear better than you actually are, right? That's another theory that Aussieman had is why his Japanese seems so good. And I'm presenting this other theory that kind of complements Aussieman's theory. So another factor I have is hearing multiple pitch accent systems. I I truly believe that if you listen to multiple pitch accent systems, it you will acquire pitch accent much better than someone who only focuses on one. And the reason I say this is because Aussieman listened to multiple pitch accent systems. And I think I had my own experiences with this, but I think my experiences kind of aren't invalid because I know Vietnamese and I can hear tones, so kind of invalidates this a little bit. But I think theoretically this makes sense. So we know that pitched accent is filtered by native English speakers for the most part, right? Because your brain doesn't think that it's important for the most part. Most people, there are definitely people who learn pitched accent naturally. I think that whole theory, like you can't learn pitch accent naturally, is bullshit. Because we've seen there's people in Japan who live in Japan, work in Japan, and they have native like level accents. So I think that's bullshit. And also, you will learn about pitch accent on a subconscious level or conscious level at some point when you live in Japan anyway. So if you didn't, then that means you really didn't care about like getting better, right? Remember, those people who live in Japan for like 10 years and their accent still sucks and they still suck at Japanese. That's because they're not actually trying, right? So I think hearing multiple pitch accent system really works because Aussieman said, right, he was watching videos in Hatakaben. He was watching videos in Standard, Kansai Ben. What else? I mean, those were the main two dialects, but he really like was watching videos from all over. He was watching videos from people all over Japan, right? And that's the nature of YouTube. When you're watching Japanese YouTube, is you're listening to so many people speak different dialects, and they're using all different types of sentence enders, and the tones, the pitch accent of some words will be different, right? And when your brain hears that, if your brain hears the same word, but the tone, the pitch accent is different, your brain's gonna be like, wait a minute, is the pitch accent affecting the meaning of the word, right? If you hear an accent that's very different from standard Japanese, your brain is going to realize, wait a minute, I need to pay attention to pitch because it could affect my ability to understand Japanese. Unfortunately, I don't have an example right now, but like, okay, the famous example is like, was it Bridge and Candy? I think, or was those the same? I can't remember. But yeah, Bridge is like a famous example, but that's not really a good example for what I'm particularly talking about. But if you hear those different pitch accent systems and dialects, your brain's gonna realize that the sounds of the language are important because you need to pay attention in order to understand, right? If you're listening to an accent that's so radically different from standard Japanese, your brain's gonna realize like, hey, this is pretty important to understand, right? So, for example, fucking hell. So I have this playlist I've made, which is just a bunch of dialect songs that I've been looking at or listened to, and I realized like, whoa, these dialects, I can hear a difference. Like it sounds way different from standard Japanese, and that's because I've been deliberately listening to different Japanese speakers that speak different dialects because I think there is value in understanding multiple dialects. And so I feel like I have a very good not understanding, but I feel like when someone's speaking dialect, I can just from the sounds alone, I can hear that it's different from standard Japanese. I think people are so focused on meaning first that their brain ignores the difference in sounds. And so, okay, to some not summarize, to make my point, Aussieman listened to multiple pitch access systems. He has a musical background, so he's more attuned to paying attention to sounds. So I think Aussieman, because he listened to so many different pitch accent systems and different dialects, his brain focused on sound first, then meaning, and that allowed him to acquire a better pitch accent and better pronunciation as a result, because he was so focused on the sound first, right? And that's what musicians do. They focus on sound, right? And that's why they have a better accent, because they have a more complete understanding of how the sound system works, rather than taking a approach of meaning first, then sound. And I think that's a huge thing. So, immersion. Okay, that's kind of obvious. I don't know. I don't think I need to explain this very well, but listening heavy approach, natural immersion, right? Like I said, in real life, not everyone speaks Hojingo, standard Japanese, Tokyo Ben. And so when you're on Japanese YouTube, you're going to hear people try to speak standard Japanese for the most part, but it's going to be different. And your brain's going to realize that. And you're going to hear tons of different dialects on Japanese YouTube. And like I said, listening to those different sound systems, those different dialects is going to help your brain have a deeper understanding of the sound system. It's okay. Now that I think about this, I have come up with an example. So let's say you only learn American English. Your ability to understand English is not going to be as good as someone who listens to multiple dialects of English, right? Australian English, British English, American English. When you hear those different dialects, your brain, the stress accent of every single word for all those dialects are completely different. And if you don't listen to those different dialects, your brain's not going to realize how important stress is when it comes to English, right? For example, if you're a native English speaker, then you know my accent is not like 100% standard American English, right? I have my intonation, my stress accent is a little different, right? From let's say some white guy from California, right? It's gonna be different because obviously I spoke Vietnamese growing up, so I have a little bit of an accent. But you won't hear that if you don't if you don't know what those different dialects sound like, right? Where was I going with this? For fuck's sake. Point is, I think the more sound systems that you listen to, the better your understanding of the sound is going to be, which is going to help your pitch accent understanding. Yeah. Oh, right. I was talking about natural immersion. I was like, what the fuck? Where the fuck am I going with this? Passive immersion. I'll just watch the masterclass series. I don't need to explain this. 95% comprehension, etc., etc. So this is a key point people don't understand. How did Aussieman not fucking read? Okay, people literally don't understand this. People keep misinterpreting what he means by this. Okay, Aussieman meant that when he said he didn't read, he meant that he read as a means of understanding. What that means was he's read the YouTube titles, he read the YouTube description, the YouTube comments, and he used that to learn words and acquire grammar and to acquire sentences. He didn't read more than he had to. Right? So think about it like this. Right? The people in your class who can't read well out loud and just, they can read and, they read Twitter, they read Instagram, they stuff like that, right? They can still read, right? They only read when they have to, right? For class and school, right? That's like Aussieman. He only reads. He's the guy in class who can barely read out loud, okay? And so he only read how much he needed to in order to speak, right? He learned words that he needed in order to speak, right? he did not really care about reading manga, right? All the words you read in manga, so much of it you don't really need to know, right? All the chuny words, basically, right? That he doesn't need to know that, right? To spur speaking. And so, basically, if you only focus on the words you need to know in order to understand and speak, that's gonna be the fastest way to speak. And also, you're gonna spending more time listening to those words and speaking those words, which is going to lead to progress faster when it comes to speaking because you're only focused on a very small, not small, but a very important domain of the language. So your focus is on that, right? You're practicing way more on those words in those sentences. And so your accent's going to be better as a result, right? Rather than you focusing all your time on understanding, you're focusing on your time understanding these words and how to use them. So that's going to lead to faster progress into greater mastery of that domain, which is speaking. Let me see. So this was a question that this is like a Q&A I was going to make, but then no one really asked for it, but I kind of like started writing things down that I was like, I typed this question out. I might as well save it just in case. How can you learn through reading? Impossible, question mark, right? Let's say this is someone from DJT or the Moe, right? And that's my answer. Here's my answer to this. Aussieman never said not to read. What he means is to use reading as a way to make listening comprehensible and not to prioritize reading to acquire the language, right? You're not spending 8 hours listening to visual novels. We're learning words and then you're going to try to use them and to try to understand natural speech, right? Summary, use reading as a way to make listening comprehensible, right? You read in order to make listening comprehensible, right? You learn words to make listening input comprehensible so you can learn through listening mainly, right? So that's what he means by not prioritize reading is that, okay, you're not using reading as the main focus in order to acquire language. And like I said, people who mainly read, actually, this brings up another point. If you use reading as your main focus, your mental model of the sound system is going to be very inaccurate, right? Because you're making up sounds. And that's another reason why listening leads to a better accent, right? We already know this. The reason I didn't talk about that part is because that's kind of obvious already. If you're watching this, you're probably already at more, you probably already understand the theory more. I would not recommend this video to beginners because this is quote unquote more advanced theory. So yeah, I probably should have prefaced that in the starting video, but we're not re-recording this. Anki, okay, Anki, we already know. Mental dictionaries, you can watch Matt versus Japan's video on it. Why do we use the S for S? Why do we use Anki in particular? And because it's just the fastest way to acquire language. You learn the words and then you acquire it immersion, right? You're not doing learning, then you're not doing both at the same time. You're learning and then you're acquiring, right? You're focusing on acquiring. So that doesn't need too much explanation because there's already a ton of explanation around Anki, so I don't feel like I need to go in depth on this. And the way Aussieman did Anki wasn't anything particularly special. He just learned words through his immersion and through reading word lists, etc. And he just shoved it into his brain because he thought those words were important, etc. HJLBT, speaking to Japanese people, etc. Okay, knowledge of pitch accents. I should have put that up here, but whatever. So being aware of pitch accent is going to lead to better pitch accent acquisition because you already know it exists. So you're going to be already looking out for changes in pitch, and that's going to lead to better pitch accent. Right? If you don't understand Japanese grammar, you're not going to acquire Japanese because you're not understanding, right? It's only when you're aware that things exist that you're able to acquire them, right? If I don't know any Japanese words, I'm not going to learn Japanese because I just can't understand anything, right? Sorry for the noise. Understanding competence at a similar level. Listening, speaking. Talked about that earlier. Having your understanding of competence at the similar level seems to yield better results when it comes to speaking. And I already talked about that. Bad audio. I think bad audio leads to better listening ability, and a lot of people have talked about this in the language community. Because if you have bad audio, you're forced to listen harder. You're forced to listen to the sounds more closely, and that goes back into what I said about if you pay attention to the sounds, your ability to understand and speak the language is going to be better because you have a more complete mental model of how the sounds are actually supposed to be, uh, how you're supposed to replicate the sounds in the language. So I think bad audio does play a part in that because you have to pay attention so much more, and because you're more focused on the sounds, that leads to a better acquisition of the sound system. No audio on key cards. I think this also plays a role because you're forced to recall the sounds, and you're forced to have a more in-depth understanding of the sound system because you're having to recall the sounds from memory rather than playing the audio on your cards. So I think that might play a role, but I don't think it's actually that important, but who knows. Bottom up approach to pronunciation. I talked about this earlier. Pay attention to sound first, then build meaning on top. Naturally, this will happen with the listening heavy approach for the most part, but not entirely sure though. So I talked about this earlier. But, I didn't really have a good name for it, but yeah, bottom up approach to pronunciation. Kansai Ben. So people speak, on average, people from Kansai speak faster. So there's more language density since people speak faster. More language dense obviously means you're getting more language per bit. Another thing, Kansai people, the culture. People from Kansai are way more upfront and honest. They are way more unfiltered, right? Will tell you that you're shit at speaking, right? That's happens all the time. When you speak to people from Kansai, they will just tell you like, "Man, you sound like shit, bro." They're not really like, "Oh, Jozu," like that's not really their thing, right? Depends on the person, obviously, but more on average, more people from Kansai will be honest to you about your ability, and that's the problem, right? If you're told that your speaking is pretty good, then you're obviously not going to take your accents like anything you need to work on, right? Like if you speak to people who from Tokyo, they're gonna be like, "Oh, that's pretty good, yeah, yeah, amazing," and that leads to you not trying to improve your accent because you're like, "Oh, people understand me," right? Rather than if you spoke to other people from other parts of Japan, which are, less, they care less about the whole face thing, uh, and so they're kind of like less filtered. Excuse me. I shouldn't have talked about that, but whatever. They're less filtered in their analysis of your um, speaking ability. They're like, yeah, no, it sounds like shit, dude. Like, yeah, you should actually try to speak Japanese. Like stuff like that. They're like, you're gonna be like, oh shit, like, wow, okay, I need to improve my accent because no one's fucking understanding me. Rather than people from Tokyo going, oh, I understand, and they don't really understand. They're trying to like they're having to like think about it, like, oh, wait, I think that's what he's meant to say this word, I think, and like they're understanding you, but it's like really your accent's so shit that like they're kind of like having to sit there for like a few seconds, like, what did you say, right? So I think that's a big thing is getting that feedback that Aussieman got is that because he's getting that feedback, like, yeah, you're shit, dude. Like he's gonna go shit. Like I need to like really try to speak the words better. I need to speak my sentences better. Like I need to improve my accent so people understand me. Reading, yeah, I think Osman also said he reads out loud, so I kind of made fun of him earlier, but I think it helps reading out loud, um, right? So I think that actually helped as you're getting speaking in. So yeah, I think that's everything in terms of factors that I thought about that weren't obvious from the masterclass series, and I just wanted to make this because I think um, just an interesting video to make. And yeah, I don't know. I was gonna make this longer, but I think it's kind of unnecessary. And yeah, I mean, you just right. If you watch the masterclass series, like I don't think you need to think that hard about it. But maybe you got something out of this video. And this is more of a ramble. Like I said, this was more for myself. So if you got something out of it, like that's great. If you got absolutely nothing out of this video, that's also great because it wasn't meant to help anyone. But if you did get something out of this, that's pretty crazy. You must have. You must some. I don't know how you interpret. I don't know how you understood what happened in this video because it's completely all over the place and absolutely nothing productive happened. So yeah, that's the end of the video.